I used to believe that raising children was about passing down love, that every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every meal served with trembling hands would come back one day as gratitude. That illusion dissolved the moment my daughter-in-law, Heather, smiled sweetly and said, "Mom, we'll have you move into the guest room. My parents will take the master. The light's better for their joints." She said it as casually as mentioning the weather. No discussion, no request. Just a decree, soft-voiced tyranny wrapped in politeness. Her words slid under my skin like the tip of a dull needle. Not enough to bleed, but enough to sting for a lifetime. My name is Grace Monroe, and if you've made it this far, I'm glad you're here. Give this story a like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far truth can travel, because the one I'm about to tell you tore through my family like a wildfire that refused to die. The afternoon sun spilled through the living room windows, warm and golden, mocking the ice rising in my chest. My house suddenly looked foreign. The room I'd shared with my late husband for 30 years now stood open, littered with unfamiliar suitcases, floral bedspreads, and the faint smell of someone else's cologne. My old books were stacked like junk in a corner. A plastic plant sat where my orchids once bloomed. Every corner screamed erasure. Daniel stood beside her, my son, my quiet disappointment. His hands fidgeted, his lips parted to speak, then shut again. A lifetime of obedience to the wrong woman had hollowed him out. He was no longer my boy, just Heather's echo. "I understand," I said, voice even empty, because I did. I understood everything. The guest room, where my husband's wicker chair leaned against the wall, broken and abandoned, was no longer just a smaller room. It was a message. "You don't belong here anymore." I didn't argue. I'd learned long ago that yelling at people like Heather only fuels their performance, crocodile tears, trembling voices, the whole manipulative theater. No, I saved my breath. That afternoon, while they napped on the sectional, all 4 of them, I packed a small suitcase. My fingers moved without hesitation. Important documents, a few clothes, the photo of my husband in the cracked frame. I zipped it shut quietly, the sound slicing through the silence like a farewell. They probably thought I was sulking, that I'd run to my sister Rosa for a few days, lick my wounds, and crawl back once the guilt softened me. They had no idea. My name is Grace Monroe, 66 years old, a retired art teacher who spent her life teaching children how to draw straight lines and keep their hearts soft. But soft hearts can harden, and mine just did. When my husband died, Daniel had begged me to move in. "It'll be easier for everyone, Mom. We'll take care of you," he'd said. I'd believed him. I'd given them everything, my savings, my time, my peace. I became their unpaid nanny, their cook, their insurance against inconvenience. I called it love. They called it duty. That day, I finally saw what I'd refused to see. Love that isn't respected turns into servitude. So I walked out of that house, suitcase in hand, head high. No tears, no goodbye, no more pretending we were a family. As I stepped onto the porch, I looked back one last time, the house glowing softly in the afternoon light. Heather's laughter faint behind the glass. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a stage where I'd been written out of the script. But the play wasn't over. Not yet. They thought they'd pushed me aside. They didn't know they'd just awakened the part of me that doesn't forgive the woman who can turn quiet dignity into a weapon sharper than any knife. When I first bought that house with my late husband, the walls smelled of fresh paint and wild promise. Every inch of it was built with sacrifice, our savings, our sweat, our arguments about curtain colors and mortgage payments. It wasn't just real estate, it was memory carved into wood and stone. Now, standing in the guest room Heather had condemned me to, I saw the slow unmaking of a life. My clothes lay crumpled on the bed, my late husband's books flattened beneath them. A photo frame had fallen face down, the glass cracked, his smile fractured. The air felt different, heavy, humid with disrespect. I ran my fingers over the broken glass, tracing the outline of his face. "You'd tell me to let it go, wouldn't you?" I whispered. He was always the peacemaker. But there's a line between peace and surrender, and I had crossed it too many times to count. Heather's laughter floated from the kitchen, a sound like polished metal, bright but cold. Her voice carried through the hall. "Mom, don't forget to move your toiletries. My dad needs the bathroom cabinet space." Her dad, her mother, 2 strangers who had claimed my bedroom like it was an inheritance. Daniel stood there again, caught between duty and cowardice. He said softly, "Mom, Heather didn't mean anything by it." I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I saw not a son but a man who would rather lose his mother than his comfort. "You don't have to explain," I said. "I understand." And I did. I understood that silence, too, was a choice. That evening, I sat on the edge of the bed that used to be mine and watched the door, my door, now closing on laughter that didn't include me. The feeling wasn't sadness anymore. It was something colder, older, a stillness that comes right before a storm. I thought about all the dinners I'd cooked, all the bills I'd paid quietly from my retirement check so Daniel and Heather wouldn't struggle. I thought about the mornings I'd spent holding Lucas while Heather scrolled through her phone in the salon chair. The nights I'd heard them whispering in the dark, deciding what to buy next with the money I'd earned. And I remembered the first time Heather called me Mom. Her voice honeyed, her smile precise a performance meant for her audience of one, me. I'd mistaken flattery for affection. A fatal mistake. She'd always had this way of making kindness sound like a transaction. "Grace, your stew is so comforting," she'd say, smiling. "My parents would love your cooking when they visit." It wasn't a compliment. It was groundwork. Now, every word, every little gesture from her replayed in my head, like a script written in invisible ink, one I'd never learned to read until too late. I sat in the dark until the house grew quiet. Heather's parents were asleep in my bed. Daniel's soft snore drifted from the hallway. Somewhere downstairs, the refrigerator hummed, the only thing still working in rhythm with my heart. That night, I made my decision. By dawn, I would no longer be a guest in my own life. I would no longer wait for anyone to hand me respect. I had given them everything: time, money, patience, and they mistook it for weakness. But the thing about quiet women like me is this: when we finally stop giving, the world we built for others begins to collapse. I stood by the window and watched the first thin light of morning spill over the neighborhood. It looked the same, but I wasn't. Not anymore. That morning, the house smelled like coffee and deceit. Heather's mother was frying eggs in my skillet, the one I'd bought with my husband the year we retired. Her father sat at my dining table, reading the newspaper like he'd lived there for decades. Their voices blended with the hum of domestic comfort, the kind that used to belong to me. Heather breezed in wearing silk pajamas, the kind that scream leisure. She flashed me her effortless smile, the kind people wear when they think they've won. "Morning, Grace? Hope you don't mind. We're rearranging the living room. The sunlight hits better if we move the couch toward the windows." The sunlight. Always the sunlight. Apparently, every act of theft came with the excuse of better lighting. I nodded, wordless. I didn't trust my tongue not to cut. I stirred my tea slowly, my hand steady though my chest was a storm. The clink of spoon against porcelain was the only sound I could control. "Daniel," she called, and he shuffled out of the hallway like a ghost. "Could you ask Mom to help me set up my parents' medicine cabinet later?" Her tone dripped with sugar, but her eyes carried that glint again. Triumph. Daniel looked at me, then at her, torn like a child caught between playground sides. "Maybe later," he mumbled. "Mom's tired." Heather laughed softly. "She'll get used to it." And just like that, she turned away, her ponytail swaying like a flag of victory. I finished my tea, washed the cup, and went upstairs. Every step felt heavy, deliberate, like I was climbing out of my old life one stair at a time. In the guest room, my new cell, I pulled my suitcase from the closet. The zipper's rasp broke the silence like a warning. I moved quietly, systematically, documents, jewelry, one good coat, and my husband's photo. The picture was slightly cracked at the corner, his smile forever preserved under broken glass. "You'd laugh at me for staying this long," I murmured. "You always said I forgave too easily." The bed creaked as I sat down, the suitcase beside me half packed, half resigned. I wasn't running away. I was reclaiming what was mine, my air, my name, my right to live without humiliation. Through the thin walls, I could hear Heather and her parents discussing curtain fabrics, the word remodel tossed around like confetti. The word stung. You remodel a house when it's yours. Daniel knocked softly before pushing open the door. "Mom," he began, his voice trembling, "Heather's just trying to help her parents. They're old. They need comfort." I looked up, meeting his gaze for the first time in days. "And what do I need, Daniel?" I asked. A corner? A bed near the laundry room? Or maybe a little plaque that says property of Heather? His lips parted, but no sound came. He looked down, his shoulders folding inward. The boy who once ran to me with scraped knees now stood before me as a man who couldn't find his spine. I closed the suitcase and stood up. You don't have to explain. I understand. He opened his mouth again, but I walked past him before he could find his excuses. My silence was the only thing left that still belonged to me. In the living room, Heather and her parents were laughing loud, careless laughter, the kind that fills every crack of a house until there's no room for anyone else's. I didn't say a word. I didn't look back. I walked out the front door with my suitcase in hand, feeling strangely calm. The sunlight hit my face, warm but weightless. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. As I stepped into the cab waiting by the curb, I looked at the reflection in the car window, a woman I barely recognized. Older, yes, but not defeated. My eyes were clear, my jaw set. I wasn't leaving in shame. I was leaving in silence, and silence when chosen is power. The cab pulled away from the curb, and I didn't look back. I couldn't. Some moments don't deserve a farewell. The city rolled past my window in streaks of gold and shadow. The grocery store where I once shopped for their favorite meals, the little park where I used to take Lucas for walks. Each sight carried a ghost of who I had been. A giver, a mother, a quiet fool mistaking sacrifice for love. The driver glanced in the mirror, his voice casual. "Heading far, ma'am?" "Home?" I said. It surprised me, the steadiness in my tone. I hadn't used that word in a long time. My real home sat on the west side of Oakland, a modest 2-bedroom house I'd almost forgotten existed. I'd kept it after retiring, thinking I might rent it out someday. But in truth, I'd clung to it the way you keep a spare key to your younger self just in case. When we arrived, the paint was faded, the yard overgrown, the gate squealing in protest as I pushed it open. Dust coated the windows, but the bones of the house stood firm. Mine. Entirely mine. Inside, the air was thick, heavy with the scent of old paper and neglect. Yet, for the first time in years, I breathed freely. No perfumed air fresheners, no distant laughter echoing down the hall. Just silence, dense and honest. I opened the curtains wide. Sunlight spilled across the furniture, catching on the edges of framed photographs, worn wood, a vase still holding the ghost of old flowers. I traced the dust lines with my fingers, whispering to the empty room. It's been too long. That evening, I called Rosa. "Can you send me the number for that cleaning service you mentioned? The one you used after moving?" There was a pause on her end, the kind that carries quiet worry. "Grace, did something happen again?" "It's nothing serious," I said, though my throat tightened. "Just want to get this place ready. Might stay for a while." I could almost hear her frown through the line. "All right, but you'll call me if you need anything?" "Of course." After hanging up, I stood in the middle of the room, suitcase still unopened. Through the window, dusk began to creep across the walls, painting everything in soft, forgiving hues. I felt lighter than I had in months. The cleaning crew came the next morning. 2 women and a young man, efficient and kind. They scrubbed, vacuumed, wiped away years of stillness. I opened every window, letting the wind sweep through like a benediction. The house began to breathe again. When they left, I stood alone in the clean silence, my footsteps echoing faintly against the polished floors. I went to the bedroom and placed my husband's photo on the nightstand, facing the window like he could still see the garden he once loved. "Welcome home," I whispered. That night, I made myself a simple meal soup and a piece of toast, and ate it slowly, tasting peace in every bite. I turned on an old movie, one of those black and white classics he used to love. Halfway through, I found myself laughing softly at a line I'd forgotten. The sound startled me, the laughter felt foreign, yet familiar, like a song I hadn't heard in decades. When the credits rolled, I sat in the quiet again, but this time it wasn't emptiness, it was space, mine to fill, mine to guard. Outside, the city hummed faintly in the distance. I curled up under a blanket, the air faintly scented with soap and lemon polish. I closed my eyes. Sleep came easily deep, untroubled, absolute. In the morning, when I opened my eyes, sunlight had already flooded the room. For the first time in years, I didn't wake to someone else's voice demanding, hinting, needing, only birdsong. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "You're safe now." The days that followed unfolded like slow music, a rhythm of quiet rituals I hadn't realized I missed. Morning coffee by the window, the scent of jasmine from the overgrown yard, the distant chatter of neighbors who still remembered my name. Each small sound felt sacred, as if the world had been waiting for me to return. I spent the first few days putting the house back in order, one memory at a time. The floors creaked exactly where they used to. The kitchen clock, miraculously still ticking, was 5 minutes fast, just as I'd left it. I found a half-finished sketchbook in the drawer near the window seat, pages yellowed but still carrying the faint scent of graphite and turpentine. It had been years since I'd drawn anything that wasn't for a classroom assignment or a craft fair. I ran my hand over the paper, and for the first time since my husband's death, I wanted to create something again. When I wasn't sketching, I was cleaning. Not out of necessity, but out of reverence. I polished every frame, folded every curtain, moved every chair into its proper place. Each act was small, but together they became something larger, a quiet resurrection. By the 4th day, I'd enrolled in a painting class at the local community college. I used to teach there years ago, the same beige building, the same smell of chalk, dust, and ambition. The receptionist looked up when I walked in. "Mrs. Monroe?" she said, her face lighting with recognition. "You're back?" "Yes," I said, smiling. "For myself this time." She grinned. "Good for you." And it was. For the first time in a long while, doing something for myself didn't feel selfish. It felt necessary. Evenings became my sanctuary. I'd brew chamomile tea, pull a blanket over my lap, and read until my eyes grew heavy. Sometimes, I'd fall asleep with the lamp still on, the book open beside me like a companion too kind to demand attention. Daniel called twice that week. His voice was a mix of guilt and forced cheer. "Mom, just checking in. You doing okay over there?" "I'm doing fine," I said simply, enjoying the quiet. "Maybe you could come visit soon," he said. "Lucas misses you." "I'll visit," I replied, "when it feels right." He hesitated. "Heather's been—" I didn't let him finish. "Take good care of your family, Daniel." My tone was soft, but it left no room for persuasion. When the call ended, I sat there for a long moment, staring at my reflection in the darkened window. My face was older, thinner, but my eyes had come back to life. By the end of the week, the air in my home had changed. It no longer felt stale or abandoned. It felt lived in, purposeful. On Sunday morning, I took a walk around Lake Merritt. The water shimmered under the sun, ducks gliding lazily in its reflection. A few joggers passed, nodding politely. I smiled back, surprised at how natural it felt. That's when I realized I hadn't felt lonely once, not a single moment. Heather had imagined that solitude would undo me, that I'd crumble under silence and return begging for noise. But peace, once you taste it, makes the idea of returning unbearable. That evening, I lit a candle and placed it beside my husband's photograph. "I think you'd like it here," I told him. "It's quiet, but it's alive. Just like me." I could almost hear his laugh in response, soft and approving. The next morning, I woke early, the kind of early that used to belong to responsibility. Now it belonged to choice. I made coffee, watched the steam curl up like a ribbon, and whispered to the empty room, "I'm home." And for the first time since I'd lost everything, I believed it. A month passed before I realized how completely my life had changed. It wasn't in a grand or cinematic way, no dramatic music, no sweeping sunsets. It happened in the hush of ordinary moments. The clink of a spoon in a teacup, the faint hum of the radio, the soft creak of the porch swing when the evening breeze came through. Every morning, I'd open the windows wide, letting light pour in. The house seemed to stretch awake with me, grateful for the attention. My little garden, once overrun with weeds, began to bloom again. Even the orchids Heather had thrown aside revived themselves on my balcony, their white petals unfurling like defiance made visible. Stillness had a taste clean, faintly sweet, like water drawn from a well that had been sealed too long. I began to see myself again, not through the eyes of a mother or a wife or anyone's caretaker, but through my own. I wasn't the ghost of a role anymore. I was a person. I spent my mornings painting. Landscapes at first, gentle things, forgiving things. But soon, my brush turned to faces. Lines heavy with emotion, eyes full of stories. Sometimes, without meaning to, I painted Heather's smirk onto a figure's face. Other times, Daniel's downcast gaze would emerge from the shadows of the canvas. I'd stare at them, then stroke them out with firm sweeps of color, reclaiming the page like I'd reclaimed my life. By the second month, I'd started teaching a weekend art workshop for seniors at the community center. It wasn't much, just a few tables, old easels, and the smell of acrylic, but it filled the room with laughter and companionship. People like me, who had spent a lifetime putting others first, now rediscovering joy in small acts of creation. One afternoon, a fellow instructor named Lillian, a widow with wild gray hair and a sharp wit, sat beside me after class. "You've got that look," she said. "What look?" "The look of someone who finally stopped apologizing for existing." I laughed. "Maybe. Took me 66 years. She smiled knowingly. "That's about the right age for freedom to stick." We started walking together on weekends, circling the lake as the sun dipped low. Lillian talked about her cat, her late husband, her ungrateful stepchildren. I talked about my garden, my art, and the feeling of sleeping soundly for the first time in years. Our stories were different, but the ache underneath was the same, and so was the healing. Then, one Thursday evening, my phone rang. The number was familiar. Daniel. I hesitated before answering. "Hello?" "Mom," he said, sounding awkward, tentative. "Just checking in. Everything okay?" "Better than okay," I said. "That's good," he replied. A pause stretching between us like an invisible bridge neither of us knew how to cross. "Lucas misses you." "I miss him too." There was relief in his sigh. Heather said maybe. "Daniel," I interrupted gently. "Let's not bring Heather into this. You and Lucas can visit any time. My door's open to you both." He went quiet. I could almost hear him thinking, wrestling with guilt. "Okay, Mom. Good night, Daniel." After the call, I stood by the window for a long time, watching the moon rise over the quiet street. I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel pity. Just distance, the safe, necessary kind that keeps the heart from breaking twice. Freedom, I realized, isn't loud or defiant. It's quiet. It's the ability to live a whole day without explaining yourself to anyone. The stillness I once feared had become my greatest comfort. Each evening, when I brewed my tea and settled into my worn chair, I thought, so this is peace. Not borrowed, not conditional, not fragile. Mine, entirely mine. It was almost amusing how predictable Heather was. Exactly 6 weeks after my departure, her name flashed on my phone. For a long moment, I let it ring, watching the screen like one studies an old wound that's begun to itch. Then I answered, out of curiosity more than concern. "Grace," she began, her voice dipped in syrup. "We've been so worried. Lucas asks about you every day. It's been so quiet here without you." I could almost hear her pacing, rehearsing sympathy the way an actress rehearses lines. "I'm fine, Heather," I said. "Quiet suits me." A soft, performative laugh fluttered through the speaker. "Well, that's wonderful. We're just, juggling a lot lately. With my parents here and all, medical bills, utilities, groceries, it's been tough without your help around." There it was, the real reason. Always money, dressed up as concern. "I'm sure you'll manage," I replied, steady as glass. She hesitated, then tried again, voice lowering into mock vulnerability. "You have that lovely pension, right? Maybe just until things even out? We're family, Grace. We should help each other." Family. How lightly she used the word, like it hadn't been turned into a weapon. I let silence stretch long enough to make her uncomfortable. Then I said, "The day you moved your parents into my bedroom, did you think about family then?" The line went still. I could hear her inhale, sharp and shallow. "Grace, that's not fair." "What's not fair," I interrupted, "is expecting me to pay for your choices. You wanted control of that house, Heather. Now you have it. And the bills." Her voice cracked like cheap glass. "You're being cruel." "No," I said. "I'm being clear." And with that, I hung up. For a long time after, I stood by the window, the city lights flickering like distant campfires. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. Anger is exhausting. Clarity isn't. Heather would call again, of course. People like her always do. until the silence becomes undeniable. And when they can no longer manipulate, they rewrite the story. Sure enough, 2 days later, my phone began to ring again, this time with numbers I didn't recognize. "Grace, this is Aunt Linda. Daniel told me what happened. You shouldn't isolate yourself at your age." Then another. "Aunt Grace, it's Anna. Heather's really struggling. She didn't mean to upset you. Can't you forgive her?" Each call came wrapped in judgment, coded in faux concern, but beneath every sentence lay the same message: go back, be quiet, be useful. I smiled as I deleted each voicemail. For the first time in my life, I realized how much energy people invest in keeping women compliant, especially older women who dare to reclaim what's theirs. That evening, I brewed a pot of tea and played an old jazz record. As the melody filled the room, I said aloud, to no one in particular, "I don't owe anyone an explanation." The words lingered, warm and solid, like the closing of a door that should have been shut years ago. The whispers began exactly as I expected, quiet at first, like wind brushing through curtains, and then louder, bolder, until the whole family choir had joined in. People I hadn't heard from in years suddenly found their voices. "Grace, you're being too harsh. She's just young. She didn't mean it that way. You're her elder. You should set an example." Every word carried the same unspoken command: submit. At first, I tried to explain, gently, calmly, but explanations to people who've already chosen sides are nothing but wasted breath. So I stopped. I stopped answering the phone. I stopped justifying my absence. I stopped letting their pity sound like advice. One afternoon, Rosa came over unannounced, holding a basket of homemade muffins. She set them on the counter and sighed like a woman walking into the aftermath of a storm. "You know they're all talking," she said softly. "I figured," I replied. "They think you've lost your temper. That you're overreacting." I smiled faintly. "They would. They've never seen me react at all before." Rosa studied me for a moment, and then something softened in her eyes. Pride, maybe. "You seem different," she said. "Stronger." "Peace does that," I said. "It's heavier than people think." That evening, after she left, I sat at my desk and began sorting through my phone. I opened every old message from Heather, the ones full of sugary manipulation and carefully disguised contempt. "You're so generous, Grace. Maybe you could help with this one little thing. We'll pay you back soon." Each text was a thread in the web she'd spun around me. I took screenshots of them all, saving them in a folder I named Clarity. It wasn't revenge, I was planning it was insurance. Women like Heather rely on your silence. They count on it, build empires out of it. But once you break that pattern, once you prepare quietly, they lose their power. A week later, my old neighbor from Berkeley called. "Grace, honey, I don't mean to gossip, but you should know your daughter-in-law's been talking. She tells everyone you're stingy, that you abandoned your family." One of the tenants recorded her on the porch. "I'll send it to you if you want." The recording arrived a few minutes later. Heather's voice light, performative, vicious. "It's only a matter of time before that house is ours. She won't live forever." I played it twice, not out of anger, but to let the reality settle in like a cold stone. Then I saved it in the same folder, another piece of evidence in my quiet, growing arsenal. The next morning, I met an old colleague of mine for coffee, a retired family lawyer who used to handle cases of elder exploitation. "I'm not looking to sue anyone," I told her, "but I want to understand my leverage." She nodded. "Leverage is the right word. You're not powerless, Grace. You just stopped playing their game." When I left the cafe, the air felt sharper, cleaner. I walked slower than usual, savoring each step. It struck me then how calm I felt. There was no trembling, no doubt. Just a steady hum of clarity beneath my skin. By the time I reached home, I had decided, if Heather ever tried to turn my story against me, I would make sure the truth spoke louder, not through shouting, but through paperwork, recordings, and undeniable proof. The next morning, I brewed my coffee, opened my journal, and wrote 5 words at the top of a new page. "This time she won't win. There's a calm that settles over you once you stop being afraid of losing people. It's the kind of peace that doesn't smile or tremble. It just is. Cold, firm, precise." That's how I felt when I began my quiet work. Heather wanted a war of emotion, but I chose one of paper. She thrived on scenes, on the spectacle of a weeping mother-in-law. I thrived on silence, signatures, and the slow turn of legal gears. First, I visited the bank. The manager recognized me. I'd been a customer there for 30 years. I updated my accounts, changed passwords, shifted my retirement funds into a private trust under my own name only. No joint access, no emergency beneficiaries. When the banker asked, "Would you like your son listed as secondary contact?" I smiled politely. "No, not anymore." Next came the property documents. My lawyer, Tom Caldwell, a man with kind eyes and the patience of a saint, helped me verify ownership of both homes, the one in Oakland and the one in Berkeley. "Everything's clear," he said, flipping through the papers. "No liens, no co-signers. You're the sole owner." "Good," I replied. "Then we'll keep it that way." He hesitated, as if sensing the current beneath my calm. "Grace, are you sure you want to do this? Sometimes families stop being families," I finished for him. "Yes, Tom, I'm sure." After that, I went home and opened my laptop. My fingers moved steadily, not with anger but precision. Every screenshot, every recording, every email organized into neat folders. One labeled finances, another messages, a third audio. I backed them up onto a flash drive and placed it in my safe. My late husband had once said, "People show their true colors when they think you can't defend yourself." I finally understood what he meant. A week later, I drafted a letter not to Heather, not to Daniel, but to myself. A manifesto of sorts. It began, "You owe them nothing. You were kind, not weak. You were generous, not naive. You are not abandoning them. You are rescuing yourself." I folded it carefully and slipped it between the pages of my old sketchbook. Life settled into a rhythm again. I painted in the mornings, walked by the lake in the afternoons, attended class on Thursdays. People in the neighborhood began greeting me by name again. "Miss Grace," they called me. The title felt both new and ancient, like a crown I had forgotten I once wore. Then, one Friday evening, while I was rinsing my paintbrushes, my phone buzzed. Daniel. His voice was tight, brittle. "Mom, Heather's been really upset. You shouldn't have talked to people about us." I dried my hands, listening. "I haven't talked to anyone, Daniel. But maybe the truth's doing the talking for me." He sighed. "She's under a lot of pressure. Dad's therapy, Lucas's school, the house." "The house?" I interrupted softly. "My house, you mean?" Silence. Then, "Mom, please don't make this harder." Harder. The word made me laugh, quiet, but sharp. "Daniel, sweetheart, I haven't made anything harder. You two did that all by yourselves." He mumbled something about calling again later, but I was already done listening. I ended the call mid-sentence and stood there, brush in hand, the faint smell of turpentine in the air. When I looked out the window, the sunset was painting the sky in violent shades of red and gold. It felt like a warning, or maybe a promise. They still thought they held the upper hand, that guilt or sentiment might pull me back into their orbit. But they didn't understand that once you've walked through fire and come out alone, you stop fearing the burn. That night, I poured a glass of wine and toasted to the empty room. "To self-defense," I said aloud, the words crisp as glass, "and to the kind of peace you have to fight for." By the end of summer, their perfect little world began to unravel. I didn't have to be there to see it. I could feel it in the silence between Daniel's dwindling calls, in the stiff politeness of Heather's rare text messages. When people start losing control, they become careful, too careful. The first clue came from an old neighbor in Berkeley, Mrs. Reyes. She called one morning while I was tending my balcony orchids. "Grace," she said, her voice low, conspiratorial, "I think your daughter-in-law's having problems." I smiled faintly. "Heather always has problems, dear. She just prefers other people solve them." Mrs. Reyes chuckled. "Well, this time, no one can. She's been arguing in the driveway, yelling about bills, something about her parents eating through the grocery budget. You could hear her halfway down the block." That didn't surprise me. I could imagine the scene clearly, Heather pacing with her manicured hands waving, Daniel silent as ever, the two elders shrinking into the wallpaper. For years, Heather had lived on the illusion of abundance, handbags, spa trips, perfect lighting, the life of a woman who believed appearances were currency. Without my steady pension and household management, that illusion was bound to collapse. And it did quickly. I learned through the same neighbor that Daniel had taken on extra shifts at work. Heather had sold one of her designer bags, claiming she was decluttering. Her parents, once pampered guests, had started complaining about the noise, the food, the stress. They weren't used to late-night arguments or take-out dinners. By October, cracks had turned to chasms. Heather's father, a man of quiet pride, was overheard muttering that he missed his old home, the one she'd called unlivable. Her mother stopped coming out of the master bedroom altogether, embarrassed, perhaps, by the realization that their comfort had been built on someone else's humiliation. Meanwhile, I flourished. I woke early each day, painted until noon, walked with Lillian by the lake, and sometimes treated us to coffee and pastries at the little corner cafe. My body grew stronger, my mind sharper. I could feel the years of tension draining out of me, one morning at a time. Then came the call, the one that confirmed what I already suspected. "Mom?" Daniel's voice was hoarse, desperate. "I can't do this anymore." I didn't speak. I wanted to hear it all. "Heather's impossible," he said. "She fights with her parents every night. The bills are stacking up. Lucas keeps asking why everyone's yelling. His voice cracked. I don't even recognize my home anymore." For a brief second, I felt something stir that old instinct, the one that wants to fix, to soothe, to make things right. But then I remembered the look in his eyes the day I'd been pushed out of my own bedroom, the cowardice, the silence. "Daniel," I said evenly, "you do realize this is the home you chose?" "I know," he whispered. "But maybe you could help, just until—" I cut him off. "No, Daniel. You don't need my help. You need to face the life you protected at my expense." He went quiet. I could almost hear him swallow the truth. I softened my voice, not with mercy, but with finality. "You see, son, love doesn't mean cleaning up the same mess over and over. Sometimes it means stepping aside and letting people live with what they've built." He didn't argue. He just said, almost to himself, "I think Heather's scared. She's losing control." I smiled sadly. Then maybe she'll learn what it's like to lose something she never truly valued. When the call ended, I didn't feel triumphant, just steady. The kind of steadiness that comes from watching the truth unfold exactly as it should. Outside, a soft rain began to fall. I opened the balcony door and let the scent of wet earth drift in. I thought of Heather, her house of cards collapsing, one bill, one argument, one sleepless night at a time. The poetic justice of it wasn't loud or vengeful. It was simply inevitable. It was a Saturday evening when the knock came, a hesitant, tired sound that carried the weight of shame. I knew it was Daniel before I even opened the door. A mother can recognize her child by the silence that surrounds him. When I pulled it open, there he was. My son, once so neatly pressed and confident, now looked like a shadow of himself. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes hollowed, his hands shaking as if he were holding back 1,000 unspoken apologies. "Mom," he whispered, voice cracking. "Can I come in?" I nodded and stepped aside. He sank into my couch, like a man collapsing after a long battle. His shoulders sagged, his breath uneven. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The ticking of the wall clock filled the space between us, marking each second like a judgment. Finally, he broke the silence. "I can't do this anymore." I said nothing, waiting. "Heather's parents," she yells at them now. Every day. Says they're ungrateful. She barely talks to me except to complain about money. Lucas cries all the time. I don't even know how to fix it. His words came out in fragments, raw and shaking. "She said we should ask you to come back, or at least help out financially for a few months, just until things settle down." The irony nearly made me laugh, how the people who had treated me like a burden now saw me as their salvation. "Daniel," I said softly, "do you remember the day I moved out?" He nodded slowly. "Do you remember what you said to me?" He looked confused. I told you not to take it the wrong way." "That's right," I said. "You told me not to take being replaced, disrespected, and humiliated the wrong way." His head dropped. "Mom, I didn't mean—" "I know you didn't," I interrupted. "And that's the problem. You never mean to do anything. You just let it happen." He flinched. The truth always lands heavier when it's said without anger. "Do you know what it feels like?" I continued. "To stand in the house you built, the one your husband died believing would protect you, and realize you've become a guest in your own home." He didn't answer. His silence was the confession I'd been waiting for. I rose, poured him a glass of water, and placed it in his trembling hands. "Drink," I said. He obeyed like a child, eyes glistening. When he finished, I sat across from him. "I'm not angry, Daniel. Not anymore. But I've learned something these past months. Compassion, when handed to those who mistake it for currency, becomes a disease. It drains you until there's nothing left." His lips quivered. I don't know what to do." "You live with the choices you made," I said simply. "And maybe, one day, you'll make better ones. But don't ask me to carry your regrets. I've already carried enough." The silence that followed was deep and unbroken. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed. The sound felt final, like a curtain falling at the end of a play. After a long moment, I spoke again, my voice quieter now. "You came here for help, but what you really need is a reckoning. And sometimes, the only mercy left is distance." He looked at me then, truly looked as if seeing, for the first time, the woman beneath the title Mother. "I still love you," I said. "But love doesn't mean rescuing you from yourself." His shoulders trembled. He tried to speak but couldn't. I stood, walked to the door, and opened it wide. Cool evening air drifted in. "Go home, Daniel," I said softly. "Tell your wife my money is for me, and me alone. Don't come asking again." He rose slowly, his expression a mixture of grief and understanding. At the threshold, he paused. "Mom, I'm sorry." "I know," I said. "I just wish you'd been brave enough to say that sooner." When the door closed behind him, I leaned against it for a long while, feeling the quiet press against my chest. My heart hurt, but beneath the ache was something steadier relief. Outside, the streetlights flickered on one by one, like tiny confirmations from the universe. "You were right to let go." The night Daniel left, I sat on the couch for a long time, my palms flat on the fabric where his hands had rested. The air still held his sorrow, heavy and trembling, but I didn't cry. There are tears that cleanse, and there are tears that drown. I had already cried the drowning kind years ago. Now, I was done. When the clock struck 10, I picked up my phone and scrolled to Tom Caldwell's number. My voice, when he answered, was calm and measured. "Tom, it's Grace. About what we discussed last time. I'm ready." A pause, professional but weighted. "Are you certain? Revising a will is no small step. I've never been more certain of anything." He hesitated, then said gently, "You're cutting Daniel out?" I leaned back, eyes on the photograph of my husband that sat on the mantel. His kind smile had seen me through 1,000 compromises. Not this one. "I'm cutting out the people who treated me like an afterthought in my own life," I said. "That includes him." By noon the next day, I was in Tom's office signing the papers. The sunlight poured through the tall windows, catching the edge of the silver frame on his desk. My signature came out clean, unwavering. I half expected to feel guilt, or at least a flicker of hesitation, but instead, what filled me was a strange, radiant calm. When we finished, Tom placed his pen down. "You've officially amended your estate," he said softly. "Your assets, both properties, the savings, the annuity are under your name alone. Distribution is your choice." "I'd like to add a clause," I said. 10% of everything I leave will go to California's legal aid fund for women, specifically for women denied control over their own finances." Tom looked up, surprised but pleased. "You've thought this through." "Oh yes," I said with a small smile. "Revenge is messy, justice is tidy." We both laughed quietly, though we knew it wasn't really a joke. After signing, I asked him one last thing. "Tom, how soon can I legally sell the Berkeley property?" He frowned. "The house Daniel and Heather are in?" "Yes," I said simply. "It's mine, and I want it gone." He leaned back, studying me. "You're sure?" "I lived there long enough to know what it feels like to be erased. Now it's time they learn the same." That afternoon, I drove to Berkeley with Tom to meet the property management office. The manager, a sharp young woman with kind eyes, reviewed my documents titled Deed, ID, Authorization Letter. Her brows lifted slightly as she looked from the papers to me. "So you're the sole owner?" "That's correct. Do they know?" "Not yet," I said, smiling faintly. "But they will soon." Within a week, the listing went live. 3-bedroom home in North Berkeley, excellent light, quiet neighborhood, motivated seller. The agent Tom recommended, a no-nonsense woman named Marcia, moved quickly. She walked through the house with a practiced eye, took photos, and said, "This one won't last a month." "Good," I told her. "I don't want it to." 9 days later, she called me. "First showings this Saturday. Cash buyer, full down payment. I think this is the one." I thanked her, and as I hung up, a strange thrill moved through me, not spite, not bitterness, but closure sharpening into reality. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and watched the evening settle outside my window. The air was still, the city lights soft in the distance. For the first time in years, my future wasn't something I feared. It was something I had written myself. I raised the glass slightly toward the photograph of my husband. "We did it, love," I whispered. "We're free again." And for the first time since he'd passed, I felt his presence not as memory, but as peace. The day of the showing arrived bright and windless, the kind of morning when the air feels deceptively gentle before something breaks. Marcia, my agent, met me at the property with a cheerful wave, her clipboard in hand and a pair of sharp heels clicking against the walkway. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. I wanted the walls to see what I'd become from the outside. Inside, Heather was home, and she had no idea what was coming. Marcia unlocked the front door and stepped in with her signature briskness. A young couple followed her, all bright eyes and whispered excitement. "This property's a rare find," Marcia said, her voice carrying easily through the hall. "Full ownership, no liens, motivated seller." Heather appeared in the doorway of the living room, her smile polite but stiff. "I'm sorry, can I help you?" Marcia turned with professional calm. "Oh, you must be the occupant. I'm with the listing agency. We're showing the home today." "The what?" Heather's voice jumped an octave. "The home," Marcia repeated evenly. "Miss Grace Monroe, the owner, has authorized the sale." It took only a heartbeat for the words to land. I could imagine the blood draining from Heather's face, the slow curl of disbelief giving way to outrage. "What are you talking about? We live here," she snapped, stepping forward like a cornered animal. Marcia was unshaken. She reached into her folder, pulled out the authorization letter, and handed it over. "The property title is solely under Miss Monroe's name. You're not listed as tenants, so this showing is fully legal." The young couple shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. The woman whispered, "Is this okay?" Marcia smiled reassuringly. "Everything's fine. Shall we continue the tour?" Heather's voice cracked. "You can't just walk into my home." Marcia's tone stayed clipped and calm. "Actually, ma'am, this isn't your home. You were permitted to stay here at the owner's discretion, and that discretion has ended." Right then, Daniel must have walked in. I wasn't there to see it, but I could picture him perfectly breathless, confused, his hands already raised in the universal gesture of surrender. "What's going on?" he probably asked. Heather, in full collapse, waving the papers at him. "She's selling the house, Daniel. Your mother is selling the house." He would have gone pale. He always went pale when faced with reality. Marcia later told me that Heather started shouting for the neighbors, accusing me of cruelty, betrayal, heartlessness. And that was when the universe decided to add its final touch of justice. A few curious neighbors began peeking from their balconies, filming with their phones. Word spread fast. Within hours, everyone knew the truth. The house she'd boasted about owning was never hers at all. The next morning, Daniel called me. His voice was tight, desperate. "Mom, please tell me this isn't real." "It's real," I said evenly. "But we're still living here." "For now," I said, "until the sale closes. Then you'll move." "Mom, please," he pleaded. "Think about Lucas. He's grown up here. He's grown up in a house built on my generosity," I said quietly. "And now it's time he learns that generosity isn't ownership." Silence. A long one. Then, softly, "Heather's falling apart. She should have thought of that before she pushed me out of my own bedroom." "Please," he whispered, the word more habit than hope. I closed my eyes and said the truth that had been waiting on my tongue for months. "Daniel, I raised you to be kind. I didn't realize kindness without courage becomes servitude. You've served her long enough. Now you can serve reality." He didn't call again that week. By the following Monday, Marcia phoned me with a smile in her voice. "Grace, we got a full cash offer, closing in 10 days. I exhaled slowly, a deep, clean breath that tasted of finality. "Accept it." When the papers were signed, and the sale was official, I didn't celebrate. I simply sat by my window, the sun warming my hands, and whispered, "That's done." That evening, Tom called to confirm. "It's final. The house belongs to the new owners. You did it." "Yes," I said softly. No more ghosts. Outside, the first autumn leaves were beginning to fall, spinning gently through the air, little fragments of release, golden and free. It was the morning before the move-out deadline when the knock came again this time, loud, urgent, desperate. I already knew who it was. Desperation has its own rhythm. When I opened the door, Daniel stood at the bottom of the steps, pale and exhausted. Behind him, Heather lingered in the car, oversized sunglasses covering eyes that could no longer hide her panic. She stepped out slowly, her voice brittle, but measured. "Grace, we need to talk." I crossed my arms, the door still half closed. "Make it quick." Daniel took a hesitant step forward. "Mom, please. We don't have anywhere to go. The buyers are coming tomorrow. Lucas is scared. Can't you just give us a little more time?" Heather's voice followed, trembling but carefully staged. "We were wrong, okay? My parents will move out. You can have your room back, the whole house if you want. Just, please don't sell it. Think about your grandson." I studied her face. It was strange, seeing her like that, makeup smudged, pride cracked clean down the middle. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if the tears were real. Then I remembered how well she could cry on command. "You're two grown adults," I said evenly. "You'll find another house." Heather took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were red, swollen, rimmed with fury, disguised as pleading. "So, you're really going to be this heartless? You'd put your own family out on the street?" The word family made something inside me harden. "Family?" I echoed. "Family is built on respect, Heather. You moved your parents into my home without asking. You turned my room into your storage. You laughed when I packed my things. That wasn't family, it was conquest." Daniel looked at me, voice shaking. "Mom, you said all you wanted was for us to be happy, to be together." I nodded slowly. "I did, but happiness built on someone else's humiliation isn't happiness, it's rot." Heather's composure slipped. Her lip curled. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "When you're old, sick, alone, don't expect us to come running." I met her glare with calm that could cut glass. "Heather, I would rather grow old in peace than live another day surrounded by people who see me as an ATM with a pulse." I turned, reached for the envelope I'd prepared, and handed it to Daniel. "That's from my attorney. The sale is closed. You have 5 days to vacate. After that, the new owners will initiate removal proceedings." He held the envelope like it was a weight too heavy for his hands. "Mom, please." "Daniel," I said softly, "the cruelest thing a parent can do is save their child from learning consequence. This is yours, and hers." Heather's face twisted, the mask fully gone now. "You're pathetic," she spat. "You think this makes you strong? It just makes you alone." "Maybe," I said, stepping back, "but I've been alone before. What I won't be again is powerless." With that, I closed the door. Not slammed, just closed. Firm, final. From the window, I watched them stand there for a moment, as if the weight of their own arrogance had finally landed. Then Daniel turned away, shoulders sagging, Heather storming ahead, heels striking the pavement like small detonations. The car engine roared, tires screeched, and they were gone. Inside, the silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was vast, clean, almost holy. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a cup of tea, and carried it to the porch. The autumn light spilled across the yard, soft and golden. Freedom, I realized, doesn't always come wrapped in joy. Sometimes it arrives dressed as peace, and peace, once you've tasted it, is worth everything you've lost. The sale closed on a Friday morning. By noon, the movers had arrived at the Berkeley house, their white truck idling at the curb like a punctuation mark at the end of a long, bitter sentence. I didn't go, I didn't need to. The neighborhood group chat told the story for me. Heather's outside screaming at the movers. Daniel's on the phone, looks like he's begging someone. Her parents are sitting on the steps crying. What a mess. I read the messages quietly, my tea cooling beside me. I didn't feel triumphant. Victory had nothing to do with this. What I felt was something quieter, deeper vindication stripped of its vanity. Later, a video clip arrived from Mrs. Reyes, ever the faithful observer. In it, Heather barked orders at the movers, her once perfect voice now cracked and raw. "Be careful with that box. Don't touch that cabinet." She was still trying to control the scene even as her world fell apart. Behind her, Daniel crouched by the wall, head in his hands, the boy who'd never learned how to stand up, now unable even to look up. I watched only once. Then I deleted it. Some memories don't need witnesses. That evening, the realtor called to confirm. The buyers had taken possession, and the house was officially off my hands. "Congratulations," she said. "Thank you," I replied, though the word felt too small. What I'd done wasn't about property, it was about reclaiming my name, my dignity, my narrative. The next morning, I walked down to the lake with Lillian. The sky was clear, the air cool enough to carry the smell of wet leaves. Ducks glided across the water, serene and oblivious to the noise of human undoing. "You look different," she said after a while. "Lighter." "I sold my ghosts," I said simply. She smiled, understanding more than I'd said. "Good for you." We walked in silence for a long time, our steps syncing like an old rhythm remembered. In the weeks that followed, my life settled into something almost beautiful. My house, the one in Oakland, became my sanctuary. I filled the walls with new canvases, landscapes, portraits, a few still lifes that captured nothing and everything all at once. I started donating part of my savings to women's aid foundations, helping those who, like me, had been silenced by love disguised as duty. When the thank you letters began arriving, I read each one with quiet wonder. Some were from women my age, some much younger. Their stories were different, but the ache beneath them was the same: women who had been erased and were finally writing themselves back into existence. One night, Daniel texted, "Mom, we moved. Lucas asks about you." I replied, "Tell him I miss him. I'll visit soon." He answered with a heart emoji. A small thing, but a beginning. I didn't need to forgive him. I only needed to stop carrying him like an open wound. That evening, I sat on the sofa, wrapped in a shawl my husband had bought me years ago. I pulled out an old photo album and flipped through the pages until I found it, a younger me holding newborn Daniel, both of us bathed in morning light. I traced my finger over our faces. "You did your best," I whispered. "It's okay to let go now." Outside, the sunset bled through the window, painting the walls in shades of amber and rose. The house was quiet, but not empty. It was filled with the hum of peace, soft, steady, earned. I took a slow breath, closed the album, and smiled. True happiness, I realized, isn't how many people sit beside you. It's when you finally stop shrinking yourself to keep the wrong ones close. The tea on the table had gone cold, but I drank it anyway, savoring the last bitter sip. It tasted, somehow, like freedom.